So let me start then with nonprofits. Okay, a nonprofit organization, it can be a corporation that is an organization set up for a charitable cause or a good cause, and it has no owners in the sense that a regular corporate, there's no shareholders. The profits go back to the organization for its purposes. So right now you're sitting, as I mentioned before, Yale is a nonprofit. It has no owners. It's a person, legal person in itself, but it has a board of directors. In the United States in 2010, there were 1.6 million nonprofits. It's huge. Well, the U.S. is probably the country that has the strongest nonprofit sector. My number for the United Kingdom may be out of date. It was 120,000. It's part of the U.S. culture that nonprofits are big, that it goes back to the founding ideas of this country, that we don't have the government running everything. We do things on our own initiative. Of course, it's not just the U.S. There are nonprofits in every country. But that's a lot of nonprofits, and they recently accounted for about 4% of gross domestic product. So it's okay, it's not huge, but it's a very important component of gross domestic profit. I just wanted to start by thinking about nonprofits and maybe put the idea in your head of creating one at some point in your life, sooner or later. I thought I'd start with some examples that are familiar to me of nonprofits. And why when you're thinking of some activity or some idea you have, you can set it up as for-profit or nonprofit. And let's just think about why you would do that. So I'll give you an example. Peter Tufano, he's a professor at the Harvard Business School, set up a nonprofit on his own, just as a professor. I know him, so and he gave it an inspirational name, Doorways to Dreams. Okay, and it's about personal finance and about helping people do things better in their personal financing. So one of his ideas, and he's promoting it with, he raises money for his foundation to promote it. One of them is to have an automatic checkoff on the tax form so that when you get a tax refund, instead of getting it in cash, you could go right into U.S. savings bonds to encourage people to save. All right? This is based on behavioral finance and the fact that a lot of people, especially lower income people, don't save. A little nudge like that would help them save. I'll give you a second example. Dean Carlin here at Yale he came here as an assistant professor. In 2002, he created a charity called Innovations for Poverty Action. So this is Dean Carlin. Some of you may have taken his course. Anyone took his course? Some of you, yeah. I know, actually, the doorbell rang at my house and here in New Haven, and a young woman was collecting money for charity, and it was his charity. I was shocked. He's actually sending people door to door, at least as part of his course. But since then, he's developed, again, when it's nonprofit and it's aimed at alleviating poverty, he can bring in lots of money. So right now, last year in 2010, the income of his Innovations for Poverty Action was $25 million, and he has a staff of 500 people all over the world, operating in a lot of poorer countries. That's a couple of examples that are familiar to me because they were set up by friends of mine. Another example, this is Bill Drayton. He set up something called the Ashoka Foundation. Ashoka is a Hindi name for a, what is it? It's a ruler of India who advocated nonviolence and philanthropy. And he went to Yale Law School as well as Harvard College. So it's sort of local here, but it's been a huge success, and it encourages sort of entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurs. But he didn't stay on as a professor. He taught at Stanford Law School, but dropped out because he wanted to pursue his nonprofit. So, you know, I'm amazed that these two guys can be both professors and running big nonprofit shops as well, but some people can do that. My last example is Wendy Kopp. I like this example for your age because her story starts with her senior essay. Do you know this story? She was an undergraduate at Princeton, graduated in 1989, and she had to write maybe they call it a senior thesis. And so she wrote something about education, that she had an idea that often it's hard for elementary education to find people who are passionately committed to science or mathematics or other fields, because these people typically don't want to devote their lives to teaching. But they might devote a couple of years to teaching. And so she thought that it would be a good idea to get people, when they graduate from college, to spend a year or two in elementary education. And that it would be refreshing and good for the educational system to get enthusiastic young people who are really interested in the disciplines. So that was her senior thesis. Now, of course, you can't get the government to pay for that. Maybe you could. It might be hard because, well, the teachers' union might not like this, or they might, you know, it's a sort of a controversial idea. You know, some people would say someone who's taken a course in mathematics at Yale University is really not qualified to teach young children because he or she didn't take the educational curriculum. And that's always going to be controversial. But here, when we live in a society that emphasizes nonprofits, you don't have to convince the government, all right? You convince anybody to finance this, and you can do it. So right out, she was 21 years old. She graduated from Princeton. She raised $2.5 million in her first year to set up an organization called Teach for America. And the organization merely recruited young people who had just graduated college to go into teaching. So anyway, that's become her life's work in the 20-plus years since. Let me move on to the second point that I said I was going to talk about, which is government involvement in for-profits. So governments exert control over both nonprofits and for-profits. And it's often difficult distinction between a government activity and a private activity because of the regulation that governments impose over companies and the taxes they collect. So let me first make it clear that virtually every country of the world has a substantial corporate profits tax, and in that sense, governments are co-owners of corporations, private. So the corporate profits tax is in effect a sort of partial nationalization of all the private companies in the country. So in the US, it currently stands at 35% federal and up to 12% local, state and local, depending on the state. So it's as high as 47%. It's basically half. So you could say that the US government has nationalized close to half of the private sector. The government is collecting from their profits as if they were a shareholder. This is state and local. But it's the same in other countries or similar. Canada, the Ottawa collects 16.5%, and the provinces up to 16%. A little bit lower than the US. Japan, the national government has a 40.6% profit tax. Brazil, 34%. You might think that under the Lula government, well, the recent Lula government, they would be more left-wing and would have a higher profits tax, but they don't. It's about the same. China is 25%. India is 33%. And I could go on and on. There's almost no country that doesn't have it. So in that sense, everything is part of the government. It's about the same all over the world, and that's because I think there's a reason for that. Because if you charge too high a profits tax, then business will leave your country. Why do we charge a profits tax? Well, I think the corporate profits tax is justified by recognizing that this thing about for-profit or private always has its limitations, and anything that's private is not completely isolated from other interests or activities. So I thought it was useful to think of one example. General Motors, okay. General Motors was the biggest car company in the United States, and then it had a little problem during the financial crisis and had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, you know what am I referring to when I say Chapter 11? The Bankruptcy Act has chapters, okay? And each chapter says something different. The two most important chapters for companies is Chapter 7 and Chapter 11. Okay, and what the bankruptcy law does is it creates a framework for dealing with insolvency. The framework says that a company that is in trouble can choose to apply for bankruptcy, and there's basically two important ways to do that. Chapter 7 details how you would, one way you can apply for bankruptcy, and Chapter 11 details another way. Chapter 7 is liquidation. That means that the company is in such trouble that we're going to shut it down and sell off all the assets. Chapter 11 is for a company that is in trouble, but there's something worth salvaging in terms of operating, continuing the business. So that's what GM chose Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They thought, obviously, we've been making cars for now close to 100 years. Well, at least the companies that went together to form GM. And we have a big future. So we can't pay our bills now, but we should continue. So they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. But they were in such trouble that they couldn't get out of it. So the US government and the Canadian government invested in GM. Okay, then now I wanted to move to the third thing, which I said is municipal or state and local finance. It's a big topic, but an awful lot of what gets done in this country is done by state and local governments. It's something on the order, it's bigger than the federal government. The state and local governments spend about twice as much money as the US federal government. They run all the public schools, fire departments, police departments, most of the parks. What else? I mean, a lot of things are being run by state and local governments. And so I think another thing that one could do to make things happen in the world. I mentioned the possibility of setting up a nonprofit. You can make things happen by doing that, but you can also make things happen by approaching a local government and saying to them, I think that you would do well to build a hospital or build a bridge or build a new school or even kind of business-oriented things that would be projects that the government can undertake. And then they can finance it as a state and local government. Now, one thing in the United States, every state in the United States has a balanced budget rule. That is, they have to tax people for all of the expenditures they make. They are not allowed to go into debt. But we have to be careful about what the balanced budget rules in their constitution say, because obviously there is municipal debt. Governments do borrow money. State and local governments in the United States have typically, it differs across state, but they typically have two budgets. They have an operating budget and a capital budget. The operating budget is what has to be balanced according to their constitutions. So the operating government budget involves a list of all the expenditures they made for operations and the taxes. And they cannot, it differs by state and how it's worded, but they cannot plan to run a deficit in some state. Or if they do run a deficit on the operating budget, they have to correct it soon and have a plan for correcting it soon. But the capital budget is different. It also, if a city builds a new school, for example, that's not an operating expense, right? It's a capital expense. So it's building something that will last through the ages. And so it goes on the capital budget and not on the operating budget. And all of the states allow this. They can raise money by borrowing, and they routinely do that. So that means they get into debt, and then they have a potential for going bankrupt as well. So this is the way it works. Imagine that you're setting up a new town, and it's small right now. Okay, little town, but we know that people are coming this way, and it's going to be a big town in 20, 30 years. So what do? Well, you lay out the streets and you plan for a big town. Right now, you better plan for it, right, or it'll get congested. So you better lay out wide enough streets. That's easy to do. But, you kind of want to build the streets before the people come. You have the layout and have lots and have it all planned. And how about a sewage system, okay? The people aren't here yet, okay? And so you consult a sewage engineer, and the engineer tells you, if you're going to build a sewage system, you should do it all at once. It's be too expensive to do it year after year, just adding a little bit. You got to have a plan. You have an idea where the city is going. Let's build it for a city of 20,000 people. We can do it now, but it will cost you, $100 million. So what do? You might say, we can't pay for that. There's only 30 people living in this town. How do we come up with $100 million? Obviously, you borrow, right? You put it on the capital budget. So your city that has 20 people is borrowed $100 million, and it's going to be a city of 20,000 people, it thinks. What if it doesn't work? What if they don't come? Your plan was wrong. Then the city's at risk of going bankrupt, right? So there's another whole chapter for municipal bankruptcy. Chapter 9 of the Bankruptcy Code. And Chapter 9 is for city government. There's a problem is that cities going bankrupt are different because they don't have any shareholders, right? they do have an ability to tax people. The question of how much you should tax people in a bankrupt city, if you tax them too much, they'll just all leave. So it's a subtle problem. A lot of cities will have what's called a rainy day fund. So they will accumulate assets to help them over troubled times. So when you can collect somewhat higher taxes, and then you have an endowment. The city has a endowment which can help tide them over through difficult times. But recently, most of the rainy day funds have been exhausted. The state and local governments saved for a rainy day, and this was a rainy day, the financial crisis. And so most state and local governments are in trouble right now because of the recession causing their tax revenues to decline. And there's increasing worry about municipal bankruptcies. So I said that there haven't been many historically, but people are edgy now, thinking that there could be some now because of the financial crisis. And so the yields on municipal bonds have gone up. So municipal bonds are tax-free in the United States. So if the city of New Haven, issues debt and you buy the debt, you are not subject to federal income tax on the interest that you earn. That's because in the Constitution it says that there's a separation between federal and state. The federal cannot tax the state, so they don't tax your municipal bond. There's a subsidy toward municipal bonds implicit in the tax law. I guess then I'll move to my last topic today, which is about government social insurance. And this is along the same theme. I'm talking today about the roles of finance is about risk management, and it's about incentivization. And some of the basic roles are classified under the rubric of social insurance, which is offered by the government. And this is a huge topic. And social insurance refers to insurance that is not available by a private insurance company, but that are offered generally by governments. And let me just give some examples. I put in first progressive taxes. Okay, progressive taxes are income taxes that tax higher income people at a lower rate. And progressive taxes have increasingly, in recent years, adopted something analogous to the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC. That's the US name for it, but it's now in many countries around the world, that provides negative taxes for the lowest income people. So the effect of progressive taxes with Earned Income Tax Credit is to insulate people somewhat from shocks to their income. They call it an Earned Income Tax Credit, by the way, because you have to have earned income to get the credit. You can't be just unemployed. But if you are working and earning very little, especially if you have a family, then you have a negative income tax rate so that the government augments your low income with a negative tax. I think this is very important, and it actually is effective. Otherwise, the world would be much more unequal than it is now. I would add, by the way, public services which are offered out of taxes to everyone in a country, notably education. School systems are generally free, and that is again something that these are all, I consider these a form of insurance because they benefit people who are unsuccessful in earning money. So it's like an insurance program against possible failure in achieving status in the economic system. So we also have, I'll go up here, 3, Social Security. And I'm using U.S. terms, but these are terms that these things happen in virtually all advanced countries. In the U.S., we call it OASD. That stands for Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance. Old age insurance is pensions, and that's the biggest part of the Social Security system in the United States. It's insuring you again. Well, it's really something you know is going to happen. You're going to get old someday, but we call it insurance. Survivor's insurance is life insurance. I mean, it benefits you. You're getting too old for this now, but if your parents die when you're young, the U.S. government will give you an income. You're an orphan, you have nothing, your parents died and left you nothing, you get survivor's insurance. You didn't know you had this, right? It's not publicized a lot, but it's part of what protects people, and it's offered by the government. And then thirdly, disability insurance, again, offered by the government, is against you breaking your neck and becoming paralyzed, okay? Or anything like that that makes it impossible for you to work. The U.S. government will give you an income for life. So if you are permanently paralyzed, you get an income for life. All 3 of these are purchasable in the private sector. You can buy a pension, you can buy survivor's insurance. They don't call that, they call it life insurance. It's just turning it around to a different name. The sellers of life insurance don't want to remind you that you already have a life insurance policy from the government because you might say, well, I got enough already. So they give it a different name and they call it, they probably won't remind you that you have it. And then you can buy disability insurance. But part of the problem with private offering of these insurances, disability insurance, if it's offered privately, suffers a selection bias problem that some people who realize that they are going to have a disability will buy the insurance right away. And then we have health insurance. I don't want to use the U.S. as an example for this because we're kind of a laggard on most of these things. But we had a new health bill that passed under Obama last year, and it's starting to gear up. But the U.S. is not the world leader in health insurance. But it does. It has currently about 40 million people with no health insurance. And then there's workers' compensation. These are the main aspects of social insurance today. Workers' compensation is an older form of health insurance that preceded health insurance, at least in the United States. And it compensates workers for accidents that occurred at work. And in the U.S., this came in the progressive era. But all these are risk management devices that are offered by governments.